By the middle of 1943, the B-24 Liberator had become the backbone of America's long-range bombing campaign. It could fly faster and farther than the B-17 Flying Fortress, carry a heavier bomb load, and reach targets in Germany, Poland, and the Balkans that no other Allied aircraft could touch. On paper, it was an almost perfect machine. 10 heavy Browning .50 caliber guns, arranged in powered turrets, promised complete protection against enemy fighters. The aircraft's doctrine described it as a fortress in the sky. But the reality above Europe was very different. The B-24's crews faced an environment that pushed human ability and mechanical design to their limits. The Liberator's thin wings, boxy fuselage, and high aspect ratio gave it range but also instability. At high altitude, the entire airframe vibrated, especially during formation flight, when bombers flew close together through turbulent air. Each vibration shifted the gunner's aim by inches, which at combat range translated into yards. Every mission produced the same pattern. When German FOW-19s or BF-19s attacked from below, gunners opened fire early, long before the enemy came into effective range. Tracers arced upward in random patterns, bright lines of wasted ammunition. Intelligence analysts reviewing gun camera footage discovered a painful truth. Less than 1% of the rounds fired by B-24 gunners ever hit an enemy aircraft. Even among confirmed kills, most were the result of concentrated fire from several bombers, not a single gunner's accuracy. Inside the aircraft, the difficulties multiplied. The gunner in the Sperry Ball turret, an engineering marvel hanging under the bomber's belly, operated in a metal sphere just over a meter wide. He sat crouched, knees against armor, feet on pedals that rotated the turret. The air temperature at altitude could fall below -40 degrees. Frost formed on the gun sight glass, and oxygen hoses stiffened. Communication with the crew was limited to a thin wire intercom line. In that environment, even a simple task like tracking a crossing target required enormous concentration. The gun sight itself was another limitation. Early Sperry and Briggs turrets used fixed optical sights, a small glass plate with an engraved reticle illuminated by a tiny bulb. The gunner looked through it, aligning the target with the crosshairs. But because the turret rotated independently of the bomber's fuselage, parallax errors appeared. The sight and the barrels were never perfectly aligned through the same line of motion. When the bomber pitched or rolled, the reticle shifted off-center, while the gun barrels continued moving. No amount of practice could compensate completely. Training programs tried to overcome these problems. In gunnery schools in Nevada and Florida, instructors drilled students to estimate lead angles, to track towed targets, and to fire in short, controlled bursts. Yet none of that training reproduced the violent shaking of a real combat mission. As one Air Force report noted in late 1943, the difference between range performance and operational accuracy is approximately a factor of 5. In plain terms, a gunner who could hit 1 in 5 targets on a training range could expect 1 in 20 under fire. The psychological strain was just as severe. Many gunners fired instinctively, hoping volume would substitute for precision. A waist gunner later recalled that he fired, "Not where I thought the German was, but where I wished he wasn't." Each second of firing consumed 50 rounds. A turret could empty an ammunition box in less than a minute. Bomber crews carried tens of thousands of cartridges, yet often returned home having achieved nothing except noise and empty shells. Engineers understood the pattern. They had tried adding gyro-stabilized mounts and improved reflector sights, but the vibration and the turret's confined geometry made these systems unreliable. The real need was not a new gun or motor, it was a new way of seeing. The gunner's eyes, not his weapons, were the weak link. If the line of sight could be stabilized independently from the moving aircraft, accuracy could increase exponentially without adding weight or power. At the time, this idea sounded almost impossible. The term stabilized optics existed only in laboratory experiments. But among field engineers and maintenance crews, some began to experiment with periscopic mirrors and offset viewing devices, searching for any method to isolate vision from motion. This quiet search for optical stability would soon produce one of the simplest and most effective modifications of the air war: a reflective mirror system that would triple the B-24's defensive fire accuracy. It would not come from a major manufacturer or an official directive. It would come from the field, built with scavenged parts and practical logic. The age of mirror-aided gunnery was about to begin. The idea that a mirror could change the course of aerial gunnery began far from any laboratory or high command. It started with observation. A handful of engineers and crew chiefs stationed in North Africa and later Italy who noticed something simple yet critical. Gunners were fighting their own aircraft as much as they were fighting the enemy. During a mission debrief in early 1943, mechanics from the 376th Bomb Group collected turret camera footage showing a strange pattern. The tracers from the ball turret always began wide of the target and slowly corrected inward as the gunner compensated for vibration. The gunners weren't inaccurate. They were reacting to a moving visual frame. The sight picture itself was shaking. One technical sergeant, who had worked in automotive optics before the war, proposed an unconventional fix. What if the gunner didn't look directly along the barrels at all? Instead of a direct optical sight that moved with every twitch of the turret, he imagined a periscopic mirror system, an angled mirror mounted above and behind the main sight line, reflecting the image through a stabilized housing. The mirror would isolate the gunner's eye from vibration and allow the field of view to stay steady even as the turret jolted. The principle was similar to a naval periscope, but in miniature form, adapted for fast visual tracking rather than observation. At roughly the same time, engineers at Sperry Gyroscope Company, which produced most of the B-24's ball and nose turrets, were facing the same issue. Their technicians in the field had been sending reports for months describing inconsistent aim behavior under vibration. They experimented with gyroscopic dampers and heavier sight mounts, but those only added weight and delayed turret movement. In a small test facility on Long Island, one Sperry engineer, Harold Briggs, began working on a concept he called the mirror collimator. Briggs's design used a small angled mirror coated with aluminum to reflect the reticle image onto a semi-transparent glass plate positioned before the gunner's eye. The result was a projected crosshair that appeared to float at infinity, unaffected by the gun's motion or the bomber's vibration. Unlike traditional optical sights, the gunner no longer had to align his head precisely behind the glass. The reticle stayed in place even if his position shifted slightly, allowing faster reaction times. By late 1943, the U.S. Army Air Force's Materiel Command had noticed these independent efforts. They ordered comparative trials between three systems: the standard N8A optical sight, the early Sperry mirror collimator, and a field-modified Briggs periscope assembly improvised by maintenance crews in the 15th Air Force. The test took place at Laredo Army Airfield in Texas, where gunners fired from stationary and moving turrets at target drones towed by P-40 fighters. The results shocked even the engineers. When using the standard optical sight, average hit probability at 600 yards was 2.1%. The same gunners using the mirror system after only 1 day of adjustment achieved 6.5%, more than triple. The testers repeated the trial, changing crews and turrets to rule out bias. The results held. The mirror system did not make gunners perfect, but it made them consistent. Their bursts grouped tightly and corrections were faster. The physics behind the improvement were straightforward but profound. In traditional sights, the reticle and the target exist at different optical distances. Every vibration changes the apparent relationship between them. In the mirror collimator, the reticle image is reflected from a distant virtual point, effectively infinity, so the eye perceives both target and crosshair at the same depth. This eliminates parallax error. Even a small shift in turret angle or airframe vibration no longer moves the aim point. Word spread quickly among maintenance squadrons. By early 1944, mirror mods appeared in field reports from Foggia, Benghazi, and Tunis. Some units improvised their own versions using aircraft canopy mirrors and plexiglass panels salvaged from damaged planes. Others requested official kits from Sperry. The Army Air Forces authorized experimental installation on 20 B-24s of the 98th and 376th bomb groups, both veterans of the Ploesti oil raids. Crews at first doubted the change. Many considered the new sight crazy, an unnecessary gadget dreamed up by engineers who had never faced flak. But after several missions, the skeptics quieted. Gunners began returning with confirmed claims of aircraft destroyed, reporting smoother tracking and shorter bursts. Intelligence analysts noticed the change too. German fighters were breaking off attacks sooner, suggesting that defensive accuracy had improved enough to deter head-on runs. By the spring of 1944, the air war over Europe had reached its most dangerous phase. The Luftwaffe, though weakened, still defended German airspace with skill and ferocity. B-24 liberators of the 8th and 15th Air Forces faced Me-109s, FW-190s, and twin-engine night fighters armed with 20mm and 30mm cannons. Loss rates on deep penetration raids sometimes exceeded 30%. Every improvement, even a small one, could mean the difference between survival and obliteration. In April, a set of 20 B-24s equipped with the experimental mirror sight systems arrived at RAF Hardwick and San Giovanni Airfield in Italy. Each had a slightly different configuration. Some used factory-made Sperry units with glass-polished mirrors. Others used field-adapted assemblies built from aircraft periscopes. The experiment was unofficial but closely monitored. Combat reports, gun camera footage, and ammunition expenditure logs were collected for comparison with standard aircraft. The first test came almost immediately. On April 23, 1944, the 98th Bomb Group launched a mission from Foggia toward Vienna's aircraft engine works. 40 liberators took off before dawn, climbing to 22,000 feet. Over the Alps, the formation met clear skies and heavy resistance. German fighters attacked in coordinated waves, diving through the contrails. The aircraft with the mirror sights were scattered among the group, their gunners briefed to operate as usual, with no special instructions. Gun camera film recovered after the mission revealed something striking. Tracer fire from mirror-equipped turrets tracked targets with a smooth, continuous motion, the bursts forming tight ellipses around enemy aircraft. Conventional sights, by contrast, produced scattered bursts, overshooting or lagging as gunners overcompensated for vibration. Of 6 enemy fighters destroyed during the engagement, 4 were credited to crews using the mirror system. The after-action analysis noted a 45% reduction in ammunition expenditure per claim, meaning gunners were hitting faster and with fewer wasted rounds. The mirror did not make them immune to fear or chaos, but it stabilized their view long enough to think clearly. Reports from Italy reached England within weeks. The 8th Air Force ordered limited trials of the Sperry mirror sight on B-24J models stationed at Harrington and Wendling. These aircraft flew in mixed formations over Germany, striking industrial targets in Brunswick and Hanover. Again, the results were consistent. Crews equipped with the system reported greater ease in leading fast-moving targets, particularly during head-on and belly attacks, the most lethal approach angles for German fighters. Pilots flying formation noted something else. The defensive arcs of mirror-equipped liberators seemed denser, their tracers converging more effectively. Over time, this created a measurable deterrent. Luftwaffe pilots began describing hard groups, formations that returned unusually heavy and accurate fire. Intercepted German radio transmissions referred to the new American opticals, though few understood what they were facing. The impact was statistical as well as psychological. Between May and August 1944, B-24s with the mirror sight systems recorded a kill-to-loss ratio nearly 1.7 times higher than aircraft without them. That meant for every bomber lost, more enemy fighters were destroyed. Analysts at Wright Field confirmed that the improvement could not be explained solely by pilot experience or weather conditions. The optical system was the consistent variable, but not everyone approved. Some senior officers distrusted any modification that had not passed full ordnance testing. Colonel Robert MacDonald of the 47th Bomb Wing warned that field optics modifications may interfere with calibration of turret systems. Yet after seeing the combat film himself, he relented. "Whatever that mirror thing is," he wrote in his report, "it works." As the mirror system spread through informal channels, crews began adapting it for every turret: the Sperry ball, the Emerson nose, and even the top turret. Waist gunners built improvised periscopic sights using 2 mirrors angled at 45 degrees, allowing them to fire from a more protected stance instead of leaning into the slipstream. This simple alteration reduced exposure to wind and shrapnel while improving aim. By late summer, mirror-equipped B-24s flew across Europe in every major theater. Italy, southern France, Austria, and the Balkans. They were still officially classified as field modifications, but to the crews who flew them, they were standard equipment. It was still war, brutal and unforgiving, but the mirror system had quietly shifted the balance, giving men inside the B-24 a weapon that finally matched their courage. By late 1944, the mirror system had moved beyond an improvised field fix. It had become a subject of formal study within the U.S. Army Air Force's Materiel Command. At Wright Field in Ohio, engineers began reconstructing several of the modified turrets recovered from combat units in Italy and England. The goal was to determine why this crude optical change, a mirror, some glass, and a few bolts, had produced such a dramatic increase in accuracy. When the first modified Sperry lower turret arrived at Wright Field in September 1944, the engineers immediately noticed differences from the standard model. The mirror assembly, mounted just behind the collimator lens, redirected the line of sight through a small offset prism. This stabilized the gunner's visual field by separating it from the direct recoil forces transmitted through the guns. The turret vibrated, but the reflected image remained steady. The technical report, labeled Project 1647, Optical Stabilization in Aircraft Turrets, described the improvement in precise terms. In conventional sights, the line of aim shifted as much as 2.8 milliradians for every degree of turret vibration. In the mirror collimator, that deviation dropped to 0.9 milliradians, effectively tripling accuracy at combat ranges. The engineers were impressed, but also curious. Why had such a simple idea not been implemented sooner? The answer lay in priorities. Before 1943, U.S. aircraft designers focused almost entirely on increasing gun coverage and ammunition load. Optical precision was considered secondary. The assumption was that the volume of fire, thousands of rounds per minute, would compensate for inaccuracy. The mirror system proved otherwise. It showed that clarity mattered as much as firepower. Meanwhile, field reports continued to accumulate. At Foggia, the 376th Bomb Group compiled 6 months of data comparing mirror-equipped turrets with standard configurations. In 158 recorded fighter engagements, aircraft with mirror systems achieved confirmed hits in 38% of encounters, compared to 12% for those without. Gunners fired shorter bursts, averaging 80 rounds per engagement instead of 250. That reduction in ammunition expenditure meant less weight and longer endurance on missions stretching beyond 1,500 miles. At the same time, the Sperry Gyroscope Company, recognizing both the engineering success and the publicity value, requested formal production approval from the Army Air Forces. Their engineers refined the optics, adding a vibration-damped housing and anti-fog coating to the mirror glass. The new design, officially designated the Sperry M9 periscopic gun sight, was submitted for testing in November 1944. Tests at Eglin Field in Florida confirmed what combat had already proved. Gunners trained on mock intercepts against target drones increased hit probability from 5% with the N8A sight to over 14% with the M9. More importantly, accuracy remained consistent even under simulated turbulence. The sight could hold alignment despite vibrations up to 0.6 G at 20 Hz, typical for a B-24 during evasive maneuvers. The M9 entered limited production in early 1945. By March, small batches were being shipped to depots in England and Italy for installation on B-24s and B-17Gs. Though the war in Europe was already nearing its end, commanders supported the rollout. Every surviving bomber mattered, and any system that improved crew survivability was worth implementing. But beyond its technical success, the mirror sight symbolized something deeper, a shift in how the Air Forces thought about innovation. It had not come from top-down design, but from the field. Mechanics, engineers, and gunners improvising solutions in the middle of war. The official system only existed because those crews refused to accept the limits of standard equipment. At the same time, the psychological effect of the mirror sight was impossible to ignore. In interviews conducted after missions, gunners consistently described one sensation above all: calm. The mirror's steady reflection created an illusion of stillness in the chaos of combat. For a few seconds at a time, the sky seemed stable. They could breathe, aim, and fire with intent instead of panic. The Army's Psychological Research Unit later analyzed combat footage and confirmed what the men already knew. Stress diminished fine motor control and visual focus. The mirror system didn't remove fear, but it reduced its impact by giving gunners a reliable visual anchor. By early 1945, the mirror sight had gone from a curiosity to a doctrine. Sperry engineers proposed integrating the optical principle into all future remote-controlled turrets, including those under development for the next generation of American bombers. The lessons learned from the B-24's crazy mirror would shape designs long after the war was over. As 1945 began, the war in Europe was entering its final months. But for the U.S. Army Air Forces, the fight was far from over. Even as Allied troops advanced toward the Rhine, bomber crews continued to suffer losses from flak and the remnants of the Luftwaffe. In January alone, over 100 B-24s were damaged or destroyed during missions over Germany. The demand for any improvement in defensive fire accuracy remained urgent. The mirror sight, once a field improvisation, was now officially recognized. Technical orders TO-11-1-100 and TO-11-1-101 authorized its installation across selected B-24 and B-17 units. Sperry Gyroscope Company shipped 2,000 mirror sight kits in the first quarter of 1945, each containing the periscopic housing, mounting brackets, and alignment instructions. But introducing the new system across hundreds of squadrons required more than parts. It required training. At Laredo Army Airfield in Texas, where thousands of aerial gunners had trained since 1942, a new curriculum was introduced in February 1945, periscopic gun sight familiarization. The course lasted 2 weeks and focused on optical principles, parallax correction, and tracking techniques using the mirror image. Instructors demonstrated how the floating reticle allowed continuous aim without the fatigue caused by vibration. Gunners practiced on rotating turrets mounted to training rigs, firing at moving targets towed behind trucks. Results were measurable. Before the mirror training, average trainee hit probability on mock targets was 5.8%. After 2 weeks of mirror sight instruction, the number rose to 15.3%, nearly triple. The Air Force's Training Command concluded that the psychological benefits were as important as the optical ones. Gunners reported feeling less disoriented and less prone to target drift, the loss of visual focus caused by shaking turrets. Meanwhile, in Europe, operational integration continued. The 467th Bomb Group based at Rackheath, England, was the first to field an entire squadron of mirror-equipped liberators. The squadron's after-action reports documented the results in combat terms. In March 1945, during missions over Ham and Münster, the group flew 62 sorties without losing a single aircraft to fighter attack, the first such streak in its history. Crews attributed much of their success to improved defensive coordination. The mirror sights allowed gunners to synchronize fire more easily because each could hold targets in the same visual plane without fighting the distortion caused by vibration. Commanders noticed another unexpected effect. Ammunition expenditure per mission decreased by nearly 30%. Instead of firing long, undisciplined bursts, gunners fired short, deliberate ones. With less ammunition weight, aircraft gained an additional 150 to 200 miles of range, enough to strike deeper into Germany or to divert to emergency fields when damaged. At Sperry's Long Island facility, engineers worked with the Training Command to refine teaching materials. They developed glass plate simulators that reproduced the optical behavior of the mirror system. Trainees learned to float the reticle over a moving target, leading the enemy aircraft based on angle and speed. The system rewarded control and calmness, the very qualities that separated experienced gunners from novices. Reports from the Pacific Theater soon echoed the same benefits. Though the B-24 faced different conditions there, longer missions, less fighter resistance, but harsher weather, the mirror sight still proved valuable. Crews flying from the Philippines to Okinawa noted clearer aiming during turbulence and crosswinds. In one case, a B-24 from the 43rd Bomb Group shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscar fighters in a single engagement using the mirror sight-equipped tail turret. The gunner, Staff Sergeant Donald Hepler, later remarked that the new sight made the sky stop shaking. Back in the United States, Air Force leadership began planning to standardize mirror systems across all future bomber models. The Air Materiel Command issued a post-war design recommendation. Every defensive turret should incorporate a stabilized optical system separating the gunner's line of sight from the weapon's mechanical axis. It was a technical description, but its roots were simple: a reflection in glass that had saved lives. By May 1945, training films and manuals featured the new system prominently. The once crazy idea was now doctrine. What began as a field improvisation by a few inventive crews had become an official standard of modern aerial gunnery. In an Air Force's report dated June 1945, one line summarized the transformation. Where the Liberator once filled the sky with bullets, it now aims with purpose, and the mirror has taught it how. Behind the apparent simplicity of the mirror system lay a deep and elegant piece of physics. It solved a problem that had existed since the first machine gun was mounted on an aircraft: the instability of the human eye when the gun platform itself vibrates. Every bomber gunner knew the experience. The target would appear to oscillate, dancing erratically across the glass of the sight. In reality, it was the gunner's reference frame that was moving. A typical B-24 turret, such as the Sperry Ball, operated under extreme mechanical stress. The twin .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns each produced a recoil impulse of about 500 foot-pounds per shot, firing 750 rounds per minute per barrel. This meant a recoil cycle every 0.08 seconds. A continuous hammering of steel and vibration transmitted directly into the sight housing. The resulting angular deviation was small, sometimes less than 1 degree. But at 500 yards, a 1-degree error translated into a miss by over 25 feet. The mirror system did not dampen the vibration mechanically. It removed the eye from its direct influence. Traditional reflector sights fixed the reticle physically inside the gun mount, so any motion of the gun instantly shifted the alignment between the reticle and the target. The mirror sight used a periscopic optical path that projected the aiming reticle from a stabilized plane. The gunner's line of sight was no longer rigidly connected to the gun barrels, but instead reflected through a steady optical axis. The result was a phenomenon called apparent stability through optical displacement. Even though the turret shook, the light entering the gunner's eye came from a virtual image that did not move. To his perception, the world outside seemed to calm down. The reticle floated on the horizon. This illusion allowed him to reacquire and track targets continuously, even during rapid turret rotation. Another major advantage came from parallax correction. In conventional gun sights, the reticle and target are at different focal distances. When the gunner moves his head slightly, as happens constantly in turbulence, the reticle appears to drift relative to the target. The mirror collimator projected the reticle image at optical infinity, meaning the gunner's eye perceived both target and crosshair at the same depth. This eliminated the need for precise head alignment and allowed natural, instinctive aiming. Testing at Wright Field quantified this. When a vibration table simulated B-24 airframe frequencies between 10 and 50 Hz, traditional optical sights lost alignment by up to 3 milliradians. The mirror sight's deviation was less than 1 milliradian. In practice, that meant the first burst from a mirror-equipped turret was almost always on target, while gunners with standard optics required multiple corrections. The engineers also analyzed the relationship between angular velocity of target movement and gunner response time. In combat, a fighter like the FW-190 could cross a bomber's field of fire in less than 2 seconds. The mirror sight reduced the gunner's tracking delay, the time between visual acquisition and trigger depression, from an average of 0.32 seconds to 0.18 seconds. That difference, seemingly trivial on paper, doubled the effective engagement window. Sperry's design documentation described the principle succinctly. The periscopic mirror sight transforms relative motion of the gun platform into angular displacement of reflected light rather than the image of the target. The eye perceives stability even when the weapon does not possess it. This small optical trick fundamentally changed human performance under combat stress. Neuroscientists today would describe it as reducing sensor-motor conflict, the mismatch between what the eyes see and what the body feels. For gunners, that meant less fatigue, less motion sickness, and more precise control under adrenaline-fueled conditions. Another benefit came from ergonomics. The periscopic layout allowed the gunner's head to remain further back from the sight, reducing exposure to wind blast, glare, and freezing air. It also improved communication within the turret. The gunner could glance at instruments or warning lights without losing sight of the reticle. When analyzed statistically, the overall system efficiency of defensive fire increased not by a small margin, but by orders of magnitude. Across 40 documented missions in 1944, mirror-equipped turrets achieved confirmed hits with approximately 3 times the ammunition efficiency of conventional ones. In the language of physics, the mirror sight increased the ratio of energy delivered on target to energy expended, a clear measure of military effectiveness. Technological diagrams and test data tell one side of the story, but the true impact of the mirror system was written in the memories of those who used it. The gunners of the B-24 were not engineers. Most were farm boys, mechanics, or factory workers who had learned to operate complex machinery in a matter of months. For them, every improvement in visibility or comfort meant the difference between life and death. Inside the Liberator, the environment was brutal. The temperature at 25,000 feet could drop below -40 degrees. The aircraft's skin vibrated continuously, and the turret glass often frosted over with ice crystals that blurred vision. A gunner's world was a tiny metal sphere, or a narrow plexiglass blister, buffeted by slipstream and engine roar. Communication was limited to terse words over the intercom. Bandits 10 o'clock high. Fighters diving from below. In those seconds, clarity was everything. Before the mirror system, the standard reflector sight required the gunner to press his face close to the glass. Every vibration slammed the frame against his goggles. His line of sight moved with every tremor of the turret or flex of the aircraft. To track an attacking fighter meant physically moving his head and shoulders in rhythm with the guns. In combat footage from 1943, tracers fired from these turrets appear scattered, wide arcs of light with few consistent hits. When the mirror system appeared, gunners immediately noticed the difference. They no longer had to hunch into the sight. They could sit back slightly, maintaining a steady image. The reticle floated calmly, seemingly disconnected from the chaos of the airframe. Veterans later described it as if the mirror held the sky still. It was the first time many could fire accurately without instinctively bracing against the motion of the turret. One waist gunner of the 464 bomb group recalled his first engagement using the periscopic sight during a mission over Austria. "We were at 21,000 when 3 109s came in low and fast. Usually I'd lose them in the bounce. The sight would jump, and I'd just hose it. This time the mirror didn't move. I tracked him clean, squeezed short, 3 bursts. He rolled out smoking. I thought the gun must have jammed because it felt too easy." For commanders analyzing debriefs, that phrase, "too easy," appeared again and again. The mirror didn't simply increase accuracy, it changed the gunner's psychological state. Under fire, small illusions mattered. A steady sight picture created the perception of control in a situation that was otherwise uncontrollable. Combat stress studies later conducted at the School of Aviation Medicine confirmed this effect. Heart rate recordings taken during simulated engagements showed that gunners using mirror sights maintained lower pulse rates and steadier breathing patterns than those using standard optics. Their reaction times were faster, but their behavior was less frantic. The human nervous system, it seemed, responded not only to threat but to visual stability. There were other subtler benefits. The improved sightline allowed gunners to recognize attack patterns sooner. From the mirror's broader field of view, they could detect the glint of sunlight on an approaching fighter seconds earlier than before. Those seconds mattered. They gave the pilot time to maneuver, the formation time to tighten, the crew time to prepare. Not every gunner trusted the system at first. Some veterans of dozens of missions believed that the mirror's offset angle could distort range perception. But after a few sorties, even the skeptics adapted. The feedback from the field was overwhelmingly consistent. Aiming was smoother, engagement felt calmer, and confirmed kills increased. The system also had a profound effect on teamwork. In multi-turret coordination, Especially in the B-24's defensive arcs, the mirror sights helped synchronize fire. Waist, top, and tail gunners could all maintain the same lead angle without fighting their own vibration. This cohesion transformed the Liberator from a collection of isolated gunners into an integrated defensive network. Luftwaffe pilots began reporting formations that returned unnaturally synchronized fire, as if the bombers were guided by a single sighting system. The mirror system didn't make the air war less deadly. Crews still faced flak bursts and engine fires, still watched comrades go down in flames. But it did give them a fighting chance. And in the eyes of the men who survived, that chance meant everything. After the war, many veterans credited the mirror system as one of those small miracles of engineering that never made headlines but saved countless lives. It didn't look revolutionary. It was just a piece of polished glass mounted at an angle. Yet for those who sat in freezing turrets over Germany or the Philippines, it represented something profound: order within chaos, steadiness amid fear. By the final year of the war, the cumulative effects of the mirror system were beginning to appear not only in combat reports, but in the statistical summaries of the Army Air Forces. At first, the numbers seemed modest: a few percentage points of improvement in gunnery accuracy, slight reductions in ammunition use, but across thousands of sorties, those percentages translated into lives, aircraft, and missions saved. The Air Technical Service Command compiled data from 9 bomber groups using B-24s, equipped with mirror or periscopic sights between March 1944 and April 1945. Across 1,276 recorded fighter engagements, aircraft fitted with the mirror system achieved a kill ratio of 1.4 enemy fighters per lost bomber, compared to 0.8 for standard aircraft. That difference, a 75% improvement, was statistically significant. It meant that for every 2 formations sent deep into enemy airspace, one returned that otherwise might not have. Commanders also tracked another critical metric: mission completion rate. On average, mirror-equipped bombers aborted 18% fewer missions due to mechanical failures or crew fatigue. Gunners reported fewer cases of motion sickness, disorientation, or temporary blindness caused by vibration and glare. The mirror sight's stability not only improved accuracy, but reduced physical strain, allowing crews to maintain defensive vigilance for the full duration of long-range missions, some exceeding 8 hours. Strategically, this mattered enormously. The Liberator's endurance made it ideal for strikes far beyond the reach of escort fighters in early 1944. Before the arrival of the P-51 Mustang, bombers had to rely solely on their defensive armament to survive. In those critical months, any increase in defensive fire effectiveness helped sustain the bombing offensive that crippled German industry and forced the Luftwaffe into attrition. Declassified intelligence from the Luftwaffe confirms that German pilots noticed the change. Reports from Jagdgeschwader 3 and 27 described improved American defensive accuracy beginning mid-1944 and recommended avoiding long tracking attacks from astern. The periscopic mirrors invisible from outside the aircraft were never fully understood by enemy analysts, who assumed new types of power-assisted turrets had been introduced. The mirror system's impact extended beyond direct air-to-air combat. With improved defensive confidence, bomber formations could maintain tighter spacing, reducing drag and improving fuel efficiency. A formation of 30 B-24s with mirror-equipped turrets consumed roughly 2% less fuel per mission due to reduced evasive maneuvering. Small in isolation, but significant over hundreds of sorties. At the tactical level, squadron leaders noted that mirror-equipped gunners required fewer practice rounds to maintain proficiency. Their simulated accuracy remained consistent across multiple missions, suggesting that the system reduced the skill decay typical of prolonged combat fatigue. Training resources could therefore be redirected, a subtle but meaningful advantage in wartime logistics. By late 1944, statistical modeling at Wright Field confirmed the overall effect. Analysts combined field data from Europe and the Pacific, concluding that the mirror sight improved the probability of a defensive hit per engagement by 2.8 times. Given that the B-24 carried roughly 10,000 rounds of ammunition, this efficiency translated to several tons of saved logistics per squadron per month. At the strategic planning level, this data reached beyond immediate wartime application. The Operations Analysis Division incorporated it into projections for post-war bomber design. Their conclusion was clear. Optical stabilization had proven just as critical to defensive effectiveness as weapon power or rate of fire. Future turrets, whether manned or remote-controlled, would require similar systems. Even as the European war drew to a close in May 1945, the technology continued evolving. In the Pacific, B-24s flying from Okinawa and the Philippines carried late-model Sperry periscopic sights during the final bombing campaigns against Japan. Although Japanese interceptors were less capable than their German counterparts, the system still proved valuable in turbulent tropical air. Crews credited it with maintaining accurate fire during low-level missions over Formosa and the South China Sea. The mirror system's influence reached beyond the battlefield. In reports circulated to industrial partners like General Electric and Boeing, Sperry engineers emphasized that the optical principles behind the mirror sight could be adapted for remote-controlled turrets, a concept then in its infancy. When Boeing engineers later developed the B-29's central fire control system, they incorporated similar stabilized optical paths and reflective reticles, a direct technological descendant of the B-24's crazy mirror. When World War II ended in 1945, the B-24 Liberator, once the most produced heavy bomber in history, began to fade from service. The skies over Europe grew quiet, and the factories that had built thousands of bombers shifted back to civilian production. Yet within laboratories and design offices across the United States, the lessons learned from years of combat were just beginning to take shape. Among them was one of the smallest, simplest, and most overlooked innovations of the war: the mirror sight. In the months following victory, engineers at Sperry, General Electric, and the newly formed Air Technical Intelligence Command reviewed the enormous archive of combat data collected during the strategic bombing campaign. Their goal was to identify which wartime inventions were worth preserving for the next generation of aircraft. Among reports on radar, jet propulsion, and pressurization, a handful of documents kept reappearing. Periscopic mirror gun sight trials, 1943 to 45. The data was clear. The mirror system had improved hit probability, reduced ammunition use, and stabilized the gunner's field of view. But beyond its immediate tactical success, it represented a new principle: optical stabilization through displacement rather than mass damping. This idea would become central to nearly every weapon sighting and guidance system of the next half-century. In 1946, a team of Sperry engineers presented their findings to the Army Air Force's Engineering Division. Their report, titled Post-War Applications of Combat Optical Devices, traced a direct line from the mirror sight to the future of remote-controlled and gyro-stabilized turrets. It proposed that the psychological and visual benefits of an independent optical line of sight should be considered essential to any automatic fire control system. That same year, Boeing engineers working on the B-29 Superfortress and the experimental B-50 incorporated a refined version of the periscopic mirror into the aircraft's central fire control system. Unlike the manually operated B-24 turrets, the B-29's gunners controlled remote turrets through optical periscopes connected to gyro-stabilized sights. The reticle, projected at infinity through a mirror collimator, allowed precise control even when the aircraft shook in turbulence or during evasive turns. Though far more complex than its wartime predecessor, the principle was identical. Stabilize the image, not the machine. By 1947, as the U.S. Air Force became an independent branch, optical engineers were already experimenting with integrating the mirror principle into early radar-guided fire control systems. The transition from reflective glass to cathode ray tubes began, but the conceptual link remained. The same physics that had steadied the gunner's eye in a B-24 now stabilized electronic images in radar scopes and bomb sights. The human side of the technology was not forgotten. The Air Force's Medical Corps, which had studied combat stress and sensory performance, incorporated the mirror sight's lessons into training for jet-age aviators. They concluded that visual stability, whether achieved mechanically, optically, or electronically, was key to reducing fatigue and improving decision-making under pressure. The mirror, they wrote, did not merely show a reflection, it gave the operator a constant world to act upon. Sperry Gyroscope continued to refine its periscopic systems through the late 1940s. The company's patents for optically stabilized reflector assemblies and collimated gun sight mirror systems drew directly from wartime prototypes tested in the B-24. Many of these designs became standard features in the early jet bombers of the Cold War. The B-45 Tornado, B-47 Stratojet, and even the legendary B-52 Stratofortress. In each case, the gunner or bombardier viewed the world through an image that remained steady even as the aircraft shook at transonic speeds. Across the Atlantic, the British Air Ministry pursued similar developments. Engineers at Ferranti and the Royal Aircraft Establishment analyzed captured American and German optics, including Sperry's mirror sight. The result was the Ferranti Mark I gyro sight, first fitted to late-war Spitfires and Meteors. It too projected a stabilized reticle using mirrors and gyros, a direct descendant of the crazy mirror that once hung inside a Liberator turret. As aviation moved into the jet and missile age, the principle found new homes in tank periscopes, naval guns, and later in the head-up displays of fighter aircraft. The line of sight stabilized independently of the vehicle's motion, a concept first proven not in a laboratory, but in the frozen chaos of a World War II bomber turret. For historians of technology, the mirror sight represented an inflection point, where battlefield improvisation met long-term innovation. It demonstrated that progress in warfare often came not from massive leaps, but from small, human-centered adjustments that made complex machines more usable under stress. By the 1950s, most surviving B-24s had been scrapped or sold. Yet in an ironic twist, parts of their mirror sights continued to serve in post-war trainers and early electronic test rigs. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, engineers reused mirror assemblies from decommissioned turrets in gyrocalibration systems for new aircraft. In these labs, technicians often remarked that the old B-24 glass still holds steady. The mirror system's greatest legacy, however, was philosophical. It taught designers to think about the operator's perspective, to engineer not just the weapon, but the experience of using it. It showed that control and accuracy were as much psychological as mechanical. When later generations of engineers developed stabilized camera mounts, optical bomb sights, and head-up displays, they were, knowingly or not, following the same logic that had guided those wartime innovators. Separate the human eye from the chaos of the machine, and the result will always be precision. The mirror sight had started as a desperate improvisation, a field fix to make sense of a shaking world. In the post-war years, it became a foundational idea that defined how humans and machines would see together. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.